Um, we are going to talk a little bit today about a collective that both Student Voice and the Prichard Committee Student Voice team, who you've heard from today, have been a part of helping form. And so Move School Forward is the product of the Education Justice Collective. I'm going to share just a bit about our members. So we are currently over a dozen youth-led and driven organizations from across the United States. We are in every major region, so folks up in New England, like the Youth Organizing Project, and in Philly, like Ed, over in Oregon Student Voice, the co-host of this Convening Iowa, New York and Teen Take Charge, and then a couple national groups like ours and Our Turn, who have several different student coalitions. Yeah, I will turn it over to Taylor to share a little bit more about that process, because I think that's an important piece of framing before we get into the conversation. And as a preview, we're going to talk a little bit about the product we created, which is a list of student crafted demands for ed justice. If somebody will drop the Move School Forward website into the chat, that would be awesome. So turning it over to you, Taylor, to share a little bit more about some of these organizations, and then I can help moderate as we go through a conversation about the demands.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Student Voice. I'm currently based in Charleston, South Carolina. And as we started to think through what we wanted this process to look like, it was really important to us that we had representation from all over the United States, because unlike some of these other issues like climate action or gun violence prevention, we know that education justice is a process that demands really localized action. And so we knew that we needed to aggregate young people from all across the country who had distinct experiences with power mapping in their local communities, and we're working on different issues based on the needs of their communities. And so that was a lot of how this process began. And we were lucky enough that we've been at Student Voice building a lot of these relationships over the years. And so we first reached out to some of our friends like the Prichard Committee Student Voice team, Iowa SLI, Ed, and started to aggregate their networks. And this really just grew. So we spent a lot of time connecting with every organization to really get a sense of what people are already working at, and really hoping that this collective can weave together a broader narrative about the kinds of incredible youth action people are taking, because we know that young people all across the country are standing up and demanding justice in their schools and communities, and we're really trying to figure out how to package that in a cohesive narrative that recognizes and respects the nuance that each organization is working on with the distinct needs of their communities, but also recognizes and shares a narrative of a shared set of values. And so that's a lot of what we tried to do as we co-created some of these campaign principles.
And I will throw it over to Emmy to just share a little bit about overall the product and some of the process here, which I think is the more important story than the demands themselves.
Yeah, I think in the midst of these kind of compounding crises, both the pandemic and this renewed sense that we need to deal with the systemic racism that permeates our country, we were thinking through as task forces are being formed and conversations about reopening are starting how students could really influence those, even if we weren't on the ground right away. And so we thought through these demands as a guiding mode to go about doing that work, and thought that uniting all our organizations with these things that in many ways had just been unspoken, but guided us since our inception, and in some of our most important efforts, that these principles could then serve as also a guiding force for policymakers and legislators, district leaders who we are still seeking to work with. And I think the speakers really touched on that in the way that they go about their work, thinking that these demands could help us students be partners in the work of improving schools.
Sweet, thank you, Emmy. And now we're gonna actually get into a little bit of the content of the demands. So we'll go ahead and warn that I have just repurposed our Instagram graphics, so they're a little hard to read here. But I'm gonna turn it over to Vaughn to share the first four, and then we'll have Taylor share the second half.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Cool. Hi everyone. So we'll go through the demands now. The first demand is that students must have a voice that shapes their education. Sort of the basis of all of these demands and sort of the basis of a lot of the work that's being done and that's been shared today. But this demand is essentially focused on the idea that students need to be leaders in their schools, need to be not just an afterthought in the creation process as we go back into school, into a school year that's different than any school year we've had before, but that students are actively at the forefront of decision making, are actively the people creating the decision making processes rather than just being added in afterwards. The second one is a just response to COVID-19 must prioritize comprehensive support for marginalized students. This demand is to recognize that many students hold identities that are not only not honored in our education system, but are actively punished in our education system, and that there is no moving school forward without addressing how our systems have been built to hurt students, harm students. On the Move School Forward website, there is a drop-down menu where we list out in a little bit more detail what we mean by marginalized students and what identities that might cover. Also, a part of understanding response to COVID-19 is that both our school systems and COVID-19 will be compounding their effect on students holding certain identities, such as Black students, such as low-income students. Our third demand is that students' basic needs must be completely met. This demand covers things like school lunch, mental health care, home safety, food and water, these sort of basic needs that allow for students to show up and participate wholly in school. This demand is sort of one of those demands that levels the playing field, that allows for all of the extra things we built on top. The fourth demand is that the public sector should support schools in closing the digital divide. As a result of COVID-19, most, if not all, schools have been transitioned to digital learning, distance learning, virtual learning, that most schools were not prepared for. And with the huge disparities in what students have access to technology and internet at home and those who don't, it is important that we take active steps to ensure that students have access to all the tools that they need to go forward in this new form of education that we're experiencing that's so dependent on technology. Yeah, those are the first four, and I'll pass it off to Taylor.
Awesome. And so number 5 is schools must cultivate a positive and nurturing climate and culture. And this is something that we're hearing about a lot right now when we're hearing demands for police-free schools, a call for counselors, not cops. And it's also something that we really want to point out, that school climate exists even if school is virtual. So school climate is something that refers to the whole host of how young people feel when they're engaging with school. And from our conversations with students, a lot of that piece got lost during this transition to digital learning in this past spring. And so that's something that is really important to us, that schools and their support systems really prioritize. In addition to, of course, a really important piece of school safety is making sure that young people aren't criminalized in their own schools. And so that is really where the police-free schools demand comes from. And then we have demand number 6. The educational system must move away from one-size-fits-all instructional and evaluation methods on both the classroom and school level. And so this is a really nuanced principle. We know that the push for standardized testing was an important push that came from the civil rights community to really make sure we were documenting where schools were leaving students behind. But we also know that a lot of the assessments that were designed to be diagnostic are now playing much different roles than that. They're being the tool that decides the whole evaluation system for a school, the whole evaluation system for teachers, and often ends up reinforcing inequity by disproportionately affecting marginalized students, because we know that standardized tests are set up for white middle-class students to succeed. And so this demand is really pushing for us to rethink the way that we both evaluate individual students and schools in the school system as a whole. So thinking through how we can measure schools based on how well they're closing opportunity gaps, and really linking student evaluation to holistic measures that measure real-world learning. And then demand number 7, students must be equipped to analyze the United States history of injustice, white supremacy, and inequality, and respond as critical civic actors. And this is one that we're hearing a lot about right now, and encompasses so much. We know that there's so many ways that our schools continue to fuel anti-Blackness and are built on and perpetuate the white supremacy that this country was founded on. And so this demand really seeks to think through the multitude of ways that we can start to dismantle white supremacy in our school system. And a big piece of that is through curriculum and having school curriculums decenter whiteness. And it also includes equipping young people with the tools to take action in their schools and communities while they're still in school, and making sure that that includes more than just voting. Demand number 8 says teachers and all school staff should be fully supported to advance educational equity. We know that in our school systems, the most supported teachers are able to support their students better. And we also know that our schools serving our highest need populations and most marginalized populations often have high teacher turnover. And so this demand really tries to encapsulate all of those pieces and really sees the support systems that teachers receive as essential for them being able to provide equitable supports to their young students. And that teacher voice and youth voice are mutually reinforcing when we think about whose voices are represented in these systems. And a big piece of that is diversifying our teacher force. And then we have demand number 9, which is a fun one. Schools must be funded equitably and adequately, which sounds very simple, but especially in this moment of COVID-19 is very, very complicated. We know that in the last recession, school funding was slashed at the state level, and we're hearing that the same thing will likely happen. And so we're trying to particularly make sure that where funding cuts do occur, making sure that funding is prioritized and preserved in schools serving most marginalized populations, because those schools need resources and will see a bigger brunt to having their budget slashed. And so it's sort of a weird moment to be thinking about what equitable budget cuts look like. But knowing that some of that is inevitable at the state level, really trying to ensure that the school is serving students where school is so much of a support system for the students and for the communities are really well resourced. And then finally, number 10 really thinks about that community and school relationship, knowing that schools, and especially our neighborhood public schools, really need to be bolstered by robust social infrastructure in their surrounding communities. And a great strategy for establishing that is thinking through community schools, which work both with a specific community's unique strengths and unique needs, to think through what community and school partnership can look like that both engages parents, families, and students, and engages community infrastructure to really create a sustainable support system that feels tied to the neighborhood's distinct needs.
So now that we've gone through the demands, we just wanted to offer some time for reflection. Where have these maybe come up for you? What do you think your schools and communities need to do to improve? And what are they already doing well? How might these demands influence some of that action or jive with what you're already doing?
Sweet. And maybe let's open it up. And I, as a best practice, like changing the participant screening to just having it be all participants so you can see each other's faces. The setting you can make the gallery view, and would love to just hear maybe first reactions to any that resonate with you as a starting place.
I think that realistic demands are really, really amazing. And for my high school career, I've been in private school, so I haven't really seen firsthand the perspective of the public schools in my city. But I do know that if we were to put those demands in place, I think we could really see some good things. I think that in my city in particular, school board wise, it's really hard to get new and fresh voices and faces on the school board. So I find it challenging to see how I could fit this into my own city.
I appreciate the list of demands and all that it entails, from meeting students' basic needs to addressing systemic racism in schools. And it seems like all the angles that need to be thought through to really make school change are part of that list. And it makes me really hopeful for what can happen for schools. And I just wonder what's sort of I know you're doing some presentations, but what's the first step in getting that work done?
So
go for it. No, go.
On the website on moveschoolforward.org, under each of the guiding principles on our main page, there's a little Learn More tab with some information on further reading on each principle, but also with a link or an action step that you can take. So that's this at the small scale. The first steps for each of us individually is maybe going through the website, looking at those how you could help steps under each guiding principle. So that's sort of how we're bringing folks in. But Merrit, you can share more about what we're doing on our end.
No, that's definitely the first step. And we have been having folks sign on as individuals and as supporting organizations. And which has been, I think, the really fun work of our collective. We're getting ready to do a round of updates today of some really cool folks who've agreed to sign on. But I think we're really trying to use it and as a tool for students to have conversations, because it's hard to, and they're perhaps not perfect, but we knew that it was important to have a starting place. Part of my work has been, going state by state and looking at how and if students are involved in the conversation about reopening. And largely, you can imagine, like, the answer is like not much, if any, involvement from students. And so this too is part of like that response. We have been meeting as a collective since COVID started, and then really wanted a way to formalize the kind of conversations we were having in a comprehensive set they started as guiding principles, and I think that remains true, to try to get some political support from places like school boards and schools, and even like some state departments of ed. It went out to all the chief officers for every state ed department today, so that's exciting. But yeah, I'll let Taylor and Amy share a little bit about some of the actual work that's happening from collective members and more tangibles.
Yeah, I would also just encourage you to right now or right after you read off of this, sign on as an individual supporter, because we'll be emailing all of the folks who have signed on with action steps on hopefully a weekly basis in the next couple of weeks, as we really aggregate some pushes, especially around number 7, and really thinking through what it looks like to both decolonize curriculum itself and think through what it looks like to build an anti-racist school environment. And another piece of what we're trying to do is really amplify and uplift a lot of the incredible work that's happening in local communities all across the country. And so I'll let Emmy share a little bit more about what some of those pieces look like, but would definitely just encourage everyone to sign on, and we'll be in touch with some fun action steps. We might ask you to post some fun videos on Twitter about why you support the demands, things like that, to really build a strong coalition of folks in support.
Yeah, so some of the localized action that we're supporting as a collective is looking like this curriculum piece, and thinking through how we really give students and ourselves as students have agency in what we're being taught and how we're being taught it. So not only the information, but the ways in which it's conveyed, and are really just supporting some students around the country to double down on that front. And we're also, of course, thinking through the roles of SROs and others in school buildings who do less to promote safety and security, particularly for students of color, and are increasing efforts to ensure that there are supports by way of counselors and other social and emotional health understanding throughout school buildings.
Thank you. Any other reflections or thoughts or things you're hearing about the conversation about reopening? I think a lot of this just came out of our own conversations about what we were hearing about what was going to happen and what we wanted to make sure folks knew from students.
Thank you all so much for coming to this session and just like being here. As Taylor said, we are excited to get a better sense of action steps and hopefully include anyone who's interested in that work. as you know, we said in earlier sessions, we view this partnership between stakeholders and communities and students as a really crucial part of our work and essential to making the change that needs to happen. So very grateful for you just being here and taking the time to think through these principles.
Yeah, just add, I shared again, but we would love for you all to just follow along on social medias, like also just like the quickest action item you can take, because what that social media has quickly become is sharing out important information and updates about victories that are happening, about the very like tangible actions, like petitions that groups are putting out, and not just ours. We're really trying to just uplift all of lots of youth organizing that is happening. So that, again, that's Move School Forward. On Instagram, which has been probably the most active, and then we're working on coming up with an educator and like adult ally strategy for Twitter, which is Move School FWD, because we couldn't have the whole thing. Yeah, and we're also on Facebook, and we'll be doing some really cool Facebook Live with some expert friends who will be joining us. But I know we have just a minute left, and hopefully we can all rejoin the Zoom on the new Zoom link. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
See you soon. Thanks, Carrie.